to the left for some reason.
Welcome into another edition of Bulldogs Live, and we are catching up with one of our friends from south of the border. We had him on earlier this season to talk all things Arthur Calif, the Hamilton Bulldogs, the Los Angeles Kings, from all the Kingsmen Podcast. Jesse Cohen, thank you so much for joining us again.
My pleasure, Reed. Thanks for having me.
Before we get going, obviously I've been talking to everybody about how things have been going. You have a different perspective than most of the folks we talk to being south of the border and in California. How's life been through all of this?
Wow, that's a big question. Things have been fine for me, and I want to qualify for me because obviously it's a case-by-case basis as far as how things are going, right? But I feel like I don't have a ton of room to complain. I got a roof over my head. I got food on my plate, and there has been hockey to watch and talk about in some form. So I got my basic needs covered, I guess.
You and I are in the same boat, my friend.
Yeah.
And the hockey we will get to. Obviously, you have the connection with the Los Angeles Kings. Want to bring you on to, first and foremost, Arthur Calif. He had another tremendous season for the Hamilton Bulldogs this year. Scoring goals. He's really turned his game into a 200-foot player. He was on the penalty kill for large portions of the season, became one of the most dangerous players shorthanded in the league. From the Los Angeles perspective, what are you seeing in the growth of Arthur Calif?
Well, he's in that really annoying spot where he can only play in the OHL or the NHL, right? He's not old enough to play in the AHL. I really wish they'd get rid of that rule. So from one standpoint, you're obviously thrilled to see him excel so much at that level, and you're excited about the prospect of seeing him. But on the other hand, you're completely frustrated because, he can't play in the AHL, and the roster is constructed such that it would be very unlikely that he would crack the NHL lineup. So now you have the debate of, does he have anything left to prove back at the OHL level, which I frankly find to be kind of an annoying question or phrase in the first place. I actually spoke to Corey Stillman, head of the Sudbury Wolves, recently and asked him, is that even a thing? Like, is there such a player that doesn't have anything left to prove or learn at the OHL level once they reach a certain, offensive output? And his response, which I actually really liked, was, yeah, of course. If they didn't have anything left to prove, they'd be on an NHL roster. Now he sort of has to say that because he's coaching, a guy drafted second overall who during a pandemic who only has two options and, may have to play the rest of the season at the OHL. But I think he's right in that, these players are young and they're developing. And while it may differ from franchise to franchise as far as how easy it is to crack a lineup, or is there any room for them? Kaliyev's offensive game is obviously beyond reproach, but there is a reason, I guess, that he fell to the second round. And so certainly there are, everybody can improve at everything every day, even if it's not something that jumps out at you. So the notion that he wouldn't have anything left to prove if there was a shortened OHL season that he had to play in this season, I'd be just as excited to watch, his game away from the puck or on the defensive side of the ice, or even if it's just, increasing his offensive efficiency by a fraction of a percent. I think most Kings fans are pretty excited to see him elevate that game even more.
Well, and that's what it really is going to come down to with Arthur, because he is the kind of player that has made big strides every season. He's been in the Ontario Hockey League, and should he return for another season, I know Bulldogs fans are all hoping and pinning a lot of hopes on Arthur being back, because that top line would look pretty ridiculous. It would be Arthur Calif to one side, Tag Bertuzzi to the other, and Jan Mysak, the now Montreal Canadiens draft pick, in the middle of that first line, essentially replacing Jan Yannick from a year ago. That's three really gifted players. We saw Tag Bertuzzi break out this past season after a couple of years where injuries had been a problem for him. And now seeing the three of them together, Jesse, they look spectacular. You put another year of experience on those guys. And Jan Mysak, who started the season over in the Czech Republic, I know that league currently on hold, but he's going to be already up to speed coming into training camp. That could be a big opportunity for Arthur Calif, and he will play essentially all the big minutes, power play, penalty kill, even strength. That's got to be something that Kings fans are going to be really tuned into, because he's going to be one of those guys carrying the biggest load on a team that should compete.
Yeah, it's going to be with a touch of wistfulness, though, because when the 35th pick came around and the Kings were up, I was personally was hoping that they would take either Helge Grans or Jan Mysak. Now, they wound up taking Grans, so I'm happy, but I had sort of settled. I very rarely pay any attention to prospects. This is the first year that I actually put any kind of attention into really tracking the prospects. And this is probably why. So I felt a little bit heartbroken that Mysak didn't wind up in the Kings organization. So, but I'll still watch.
Yeah, he is a tremendous talent. And I was thinking the same thing as those picks were coming in, and you're looking, and all the footage of Mysak in the OHL is going to have Calif connected to him. Right. And you started to put those two things together. Grans is a great player. He's going to be really, really good. And the Kings are doing a brilliant job drafting. And that kind of brings us to the next thing, is this connection that the Kings have had with the OHL, but in drafting in general. They have really put together an incredible prospect pool. And now you look at adding Quinton Byfield to that group, and another tremendous output from this year's draft, in addition to what they did last year, where they had 3 picks in the top 32. It's got to be very exciting times for LA fans. It may not be the results immediately, but you look at this organization, Jesse, and I can't think of a team that's deeper than LA is right now at pretty much every position.
Yeah, they've done a pretty incredible job, not just at the highest scouting level, but even, whether it's signing undrafted players, collegiate free agents. They've done a really great job, and I've been paying a ton more attention to head of amateur scouting, Mark Yannetti. And you start to realize the organization, they're very tight-lipped about what their overall strategy and approach is, but it's very clear that they have one and have had one for a while. And I appreciate is not the correct word, but I am grateful as a fan and an employee of the team that plan clearly exists, because it's a really poor analogy, but it's one I've become really fond of this summer. I feel like a lot of people, not just in hockey, not just in sports, but in the world in general, they see somebody succeed and then they think, well, I will do exactly what that person did. I will walk exactly in those footsteps. And so the analogy I've come up with is that the people watch the movie Ratatouille. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it.
Oh, yes.
Okay, so people watch the movie Ratatouille and they think to themselves, aha, the next great chef must be a rat. And you go, well, no, that's not actually the lesson. The lesson is that the fact that he's a rat shouldn't preclude him from being a great chef, but you wouldn't actually go and try and find the next great rat chef. And so when I see the Kings and you see a team like Tampa Bay, or, whether it's Chicago or Pittsburgh, and they have success with these undersized, very, very talented, like incredibly talented forwards, who may be 5'10", 5'9", 5'8", and then the rhetoric instantly shifts to, well, is the league going to get smaller? Should the league get it in? You go, okay, well, I don't think you should preclude any players from being NHLers because they're 5'8", but I also don't think that every future NHLer has to be 5'8". And so when the opportunity to acquire someone like Quinton Byfield or Arthur Calif or Helge Grans, who are not very much not 5'8", the brass at the front of the Kings office has sort of made comments that imply this, like, size still does have its place. And if you have a player whose, talent level is 90 and another player whose talent level is 90, and the one guy is 6'2" and the other guy is 5'6", you take the 6'2" guy, unless the 5'6" guy is really that much better than him. So not that that's the secret to the Kings' success is, to get huge guys, but as I said, they're clearly looking for something. I think, I don't know what percentage of the guys they've acquired over the last 48 months is, or 48, the last 24 months, the last 2 or 3 years, a number of them have worn letters at different levels of competition, right? Whether it's acquiring Elias Anderson in the trade for the number 60 spot, who is the captain of the Swedish team, whether it's, snagging Cal Peterson from Buffalo, who actually was the captain of his Notre Dame team. Like, even the goalie wore a letter.
Yep.
So they're getting, they're not overloading on a ridiculous amount of size, but they're getting big guys with good leadership pass, who can put up numbers and who are skilled. I don't know. It is not great to finish at the bottom of the league, but if you're going to finish at the bottom of the league, you might as well be putting together an incredible prospect pool.
And that's exactly what they're doing. A funny story about Quinton Byfield. So when he was a rookie in the Ontario Hockey League 2 years ago, 16 years old, I was walking past Sudbury down in the bottom of First Ontario Center in Hamilton where they were warming up. And Byfield was warming up with his teammates, but I didn't know who he was. And I just walked past this kid that was 6'6", and I thought he was a linebacker. Like, I thought somebody had a connection with the Hamilton Ticats, our football team in town, and had brought somebody down as a strength coach. And I said to one of his teammates, "Who is the linebacker that is working out with you guys?" I said, "No, that's Byfield. He looks like that. So this kid he looks like somebody carved him out of marble. He's got an incredible physique for somebody of that age, and you see it on the ice. He reminds me so much of Joe Thornton when Thornton played in the OHL, and that if he doesn't want you to have the puck, you're just not going to get the puck. He's that strong."
Yeah, and I mean, look, Arthur Calif is not a small man.
No, and you talk about 5'8". I am 5'8", and when we travel with the team, I have to look up to interview Arthur. He's definitely somewhere in that 6'2" neighborhood. He's not a small guy by any stretch.
Yeah.
But when you look at the Kings and that connection with the OHL, and you mentioned specifically undrafted free agents, Matt Luff as well, who is still beloved in Hamilton. What he did both on and off the ice here in charity in the city, as well as his time with the Bulldogs on the ice. How's his development been going? We saw he's re-signed. He's seen time with the Kings. It looks like he's the guy that's kind of scratching the surface of what he could be.
So this is kind of what I was referring to earlier when I say organization to organization. There may be easier paths to reach the NHL. So, from Matt Luff's perspective, when he first got here, the team had Tyler Toffoli, Dustin Brown, Trevor Lewis, right? A bunch of guys on the right side. And so he would have had to, make a clear distinction in his game to ever leapfrog over those guys. And now you're talking about, okay, can he play on the fourth line? I mean, I guess, but the fourth line last year started out as Kyle Clifford, Michael Amadio, and Trevor Lewis. So if you put a guy like Matt Luff on that fourth line, not going to score a lot, not particularly known, for his 200-foot game the way someone like Trevor Lewis is. So not much point in my mind to put him there when you could have him playing, 17, 18, 19 minutes a night in Ontario. Now you have a situation where Martin Ferk seems to be the phrase I use is sort of training wheels for Gabriel Velarde because they played together so much in the AHL last season. I think the assumption is that in the NHL this year, and certainly in the previous 10 games of the last season, the two of them were paired, right? And so the left wing sort of rotated a bit around. They sort of settled on Adrian Kempe. It's incredibly small sample size. But I think the assumption is that they're going to at least roll that back again this season. And Kopitar, Iafallo, and Brown is the presumptive top line. So for Matt Luff, his only opportunity at this point is to go into training camp and outshine Martin Ferk or Dustin Brown. Dustin Brown is not going to be outshone. And Martin Ferk has the leg up of being Gabriel Velarde's training wheel. So that sort of slots him in at the second line. So Matt Luff has to hope that the coaching staff wants to transition away from a top six, bottom six configuration into a top nine configuration, right? Looking for some offense from the third line as well, and hope that his game, his defensive game has matured enough that he can be effective on a third line. I don't know if they're going to bring Elias Anderson over. I don't know if Blake Lizotte will wind up being the third line center. I don't know if Quinton Byfield is going to have an incredible camp and make the team, which would bump things. I mean, there are too many questions right now for the LA Kings to really know the answer to any one of them, because they're all going to have to start answering themselves once training camp starts. But Matt Luff has an undeniable personality.
Oh, yeah.
And, obviously Meatball, his dog, has won back-to-back Bark Madness championships for us. for first time ever that's happened in the short history of March Madness. So, I mean, I think that there are a ton of people who would very much like to root for Matt Luff at the NHL level. I just don't know what the path to that looks like because, like I said, there's so many other question marks that will shape the landscape that path has to go through.
We heard a lot on draft night about Quinton Byfield and that a lot of people just assuming he's going to walk right on to the LA Kings. The way that you're kind of painting the picture of this team, especially in the times we're living in, it may not be that simple as just Byfield shows up and he's got a roster spot. It sounds like there's going to be competition, which is never a bad thing in a training camp, but also that there's no guaranteed spots. Byfield is going to have to earn his way onto the Los Angeles Kings, which is probably the best possible thing because, again, if you go back to the Thornton comparison I made earlier, Joe Thornton under Pat Burns had to spend a year playing on the fourth line with the Boston Bruins because he was the first overall pick and they essentially guaranteed him a spot. But Burns said, well, you're guaranteed a spot, but not a spot. So it does feel like Byfield's got some work to do.
Yeah, I mean, even if this were a normal season, right, where we didn't have a condensed calendar and months, and months of time off and uncertain scheduling and playing concerns, you still have Anze Kopitar as your number one center, and that's just not going to change. He's the captain. He's got a huge cap hit. And frankly, he's one of the best centers in the NHL. So that's not going to happen. Then you have Gabriel Velarde, who, had he not had the health issues and fallen to 11th overall in the draft when the Kings took him, probably would have been a top 5 pick.
Absolutely.
He's 21 years old, and he scored 7 points in 10 games last year. So you have to give him a look, and presumably he will continue to be incredibly talented and very good. Then you have Alex Turcotte, who was the 5th overall pick last year, who's played center. Then the Kings acquired Tyler Madden from Vancouver. Then they have, again, Blake Lizotte, Michael Amadio, who Kings fans may, wish would score a few more points. But the both of them played a ton of minutes last year. And, I just think it's not as easy as fans think to supplant a guy with, 60, 70, 80 to 100 games under his belt. Michael Amadio has been around for 2.5 seasons. Has proven himself a capable fourth line center. So even if Quinton Byfield wanted to play fourth line center, it would be a situation where management would have to tell the coaching staff, similar to the Joe Thornton example you gave, listen, this kid's on the team. And then the coaching staff goes, well, where do we play him? Right. So, okay, sorry, fourth liners who have earned that spot. You're getting bumped so that we can give the rookie ice time. I feel like we're just not in that world anymore now that you have options, and a guy like Byfield, to come back to the does he have anything left to prove argument. Well, I don't know if he does or doesn't, but I'd still rather see him skate against subpar competition for 20 minutes a night than, get caved in for 7 minutes a night doing spot up duty on the fourth line. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe that would. Now I'm beginning to question my own answer. I don't know. Maybe that would be better for him. I don't know.
Well, I think it's great to have the depth to be able to have those kind of questions available, and that they don't just have to rush him right onto the team, because we've seen that in other markets not work out so well. I know it's the same sort of thing for Arthur Calif, who's been allowed to grow into the player that he's becoming. And, I mean, Matt Luff is the same sort of thing, undrafted free agent that, like you said, everybody's rooting for. Two guys, though, that personally for me, I've admitted to this on Bulldogs TV broadcasts, radio broadcasts, on the podcast itself. I watch an inordinate amount of European hockey for a Canadian, and I adore Elias Anderson.
Nice.
I think that he got a really bad rap in both the World Juniors at the end with the medal controversy and with the New York Rangers. I thought he did kind of earn himself a spot before going back to Sweden. What does his future look like with the LA Kings? Because to give up the 60th overall pick to get him, obviously they see what a lot of people saw when he first burst onto the scene. This kid is incredibly talented, but already plays an advanced two-way game.
Yeah, so I was in the building, the Kings offices, the day of the draft. We were doing our live show and had an opportunity to get some reactions from some executives after that trade. And, they came in, how's the show going? Great. What's what's the story with the trade? And they were very excited about it. I probably shouldn't repeat exactly what was said, but again, very excited. Selfishly, my hope for Lias Andersson is that he career-wise fits into the role of the guy with the incredible upside and expectations who, for whatever reason, doesn't quite live up to them, but then goes on to have an incredible career as a support player. So whether it's Trevor Lewis, drafted 17th overall in the first round, or Jarrett Stoll, I just looked that up while you're asking me. Jarrett Stoll, drafted 46th overall by Calgary in 2000, or Kyle Clifford, even also taken in the second round, if I'm not mistaken. These are guys that when you draft someone in the first or second round, right, the rhetoric is always, okay, well, this is an incredible addition to the prospect pool. This guy's going to go on, score so many goals and have so many assists. But the reality is the Kings don't win either Stanley Cup without Jarrett Stoll and Trevor Lewis. And both of those guys were never higher than the third line on the depth chart, but killed penalties, played defense. Jarrett Stoll, I think, had 9 hits. I think it was game 3 of the 2014 San Jose first round series where they wound up losing that game, but you could see that game was when they started to turn it around and then wound up winning 4 games in a row. And you look to that game and it was like I said, I think Jarrett Stoll had a goal, an assist, and 9 hits. Or I don't remember how many points he put up, but I can remember a specific shift where he just laid somebody out and the team started to play differently. And so that's, from what little I know about Lias Andersson's game, he seems to have a little bit of snarl to him. He seems to go to the net. Yeah, exactly. And then that whole incident with tossing the medal into the stands. I'm not entirely sure how I feel about it, but the guy obviously is incredibly passionate. He's obviously incredibly competitive. And if he can come over, and I know I just had all that nice talk about Amadio and Lizotte and bumping players off, the third or fourth line. But in my mind, if Lias Andersson can come over and have that kind of career that a Jarrett Stoll or a Trevor Lewis or a Kyle Clifford did, where, okay, he's not going to score 25 goals a season or 30 goals a season, but he will absolutely help you win. Selfishly, as a hockey fan and as a Kings fan, that's just the kind of team that I still put together in my head. I still don't think of teams as top 9 and then a checking line. I still think of them as top 6 and bottom 6, and your bottom 6 has roles and you hope that they play them. And if offense can come, great, right? Like a guy like Jarrett Stoll, I'm sorry to keep making comparisons to Kings of the recent past, but a guy like Jarrett Stoll, right? He scores the game winner in game 5 against Vancouver in overtime. A guy with no skill level doesn't do that, right? A guy taken in the second round, has the skills to go ahead and score those important goals when the opportunity comes. But that line also created that turnover against Vancouver to score that goal. So that's my hope for Lias Andersson. And I'm really, really encouraged by everybody I hear talk about him, including you, that seem to be describing the player that I was led to believe he is. So I am secretly very hopeful that his addition to the franchise makes it really hard for that other list of centers that I mentioned. And I left out Kupari and Sodergren and a bunch of other guys. But yeah, there's a lot of centers in the Kings prospect pool right now.
A whole ton of them. And one of the things with the Kings and some of the prospects they're amassing is Lias Andersson is no different. There's a chip on the shoulder, and it's not a selfish, I'm going to pout kind of thing. It's, I'm going to use this to motivate me. Arthur Calif thought he should have gone in the first round, and judging by his results before and after the draft, he should have gone in the first round. Lias Andersson feels like he got passed over in New York time and time again and wants to prove something. Quinton Byfield, I know, wanted to be in that same conversation as Alexis Lafreniere and kept getting left out of it. And then by draft day was getting talked about, well, is he going to fall to 3 or 4 behind Stutzla and one of the defensemen maybe? So there's a lot of guys in that system coming through with chips on their shoulder that it feels like are really going to push this team forward. And it almost feels like we talked about this last season, that this youth movement for LA coming at the right time, just as things have sort of bottomed out for some of the veterans in LA, they're going to bring in this youth movement and come back up the ranks. And it seems like it's going to happen pretty quickly, Jesse.
Yeah. So I'm prone to using terrible analogies, so I apologize. I'm going to drop another one on you. To me, the last 2 seasons felt like if you were redoing your kitchen, The last 2 seasons felt like, okay, that was the part where you sort of take a look at each appliance, at each, utensil, and you go, okay, do we want this? Do we need this? Do we bring this forward into the new kitchen? And so you jettison those that you decide you're not keeping, right? So Alec Martinez, Tyler Toffoli, Tanner Pearson, Jake Muzzin, right? There's tons of former Kings all over the league right now performing well for competitive teams. So you go, okay, it's obviously not a question of whether or not the player's any good. It's just it wasn't a fit. We're building a new kitchen, and there wasn't a place for this utensil in the new kitchen. Now, this season, this is the sort of shopping phase where you have to go, okay, well, is Gabriel Velarde our second line center? Because if he is, then we maybe don't need Tyler Madden, Leash Anderson, Alex Turcotte. I'll say just throw Quinton Byfield's name in there because he's center. Obviously, we need Quinton Byfield. But, can Martin Ferk become a productive NHL player at the age of 26 or 27? Because if he can, well, then that gives Arthur Kaliev another year or two on the waiting list. Or is Dustin Brown going to be a third? Like all those questions that I mentioned earlier that need to be answered. This is going to be, and it's unfortunate that it's happening at a time where we may get an incredibly shortened season, or, hopefully not, but maybe no season at all, or players might have to play in other leagues in order to get ice time. It's unclear what'll happen. But yeah, this team over the next 2 years will get a lot younger. I mean, the AHL team out in Ontario, the Ontario Reign, they figure to have a ton of guys between the ages of 20 and like 22, 23. I didn't even mention Cole Holt's name in all of this. They have a ton of young defensemen, ton of young forwards. Akil Thomas, I haven't mentioned Akil Thomas's name once in this whole thing. I'm an idiot. There's another center that needs to get playing time.
He was actually going to be my next topic. Another OH.
Well, there you go. And Aiden Dudas too. I'm leaving all these names off. That's how many centers we have. So yeah, it's the Reign are going to be very young this year, and I expect the Kings in the 21-22 season to sort of that wave will roll over to the NHL roster, and it'll be a lot younger.
Now, the Kings, and going to the point that you were making, Aiden Dudas, Akil Thomas, the Kings have been at the forefront of the teams that have been loaning prospects to Europe, which I think is a brilliant idea to get them some runway leading up to the season, because they got their season cut really short, all the way back to March, and are having to catch up. I know that the rest of the Kings did as well, but for prospects, it's so key to get them time. What is that relationship like? Because there's a shared ownership with Ice Baron Berlin that a lot of people didn't know about, and that they're able to move players on loan there pretty easily. How big of a card is that to have in your back pocket if you're the Kings in an unforeseen circumstance like we're in now?
I mean, I think it's huge. And it's one of those things where maybe 2 years ago, 3 years ago, if you asked how important it was, it had gotten a shrug from everybody. Because it's the DEL, obviously they're starting to produce more players to come over and appear at the NHL level, Moritz Seider and Tim Stutzla, obviously. Did Draisaitl play in the DEL? I don't honestly remember. But obviously, guys,
he did before he came over to the juniors, I believe.
Okay, so the league is starting to produce, NHL caliber players, but obviously the level of competition is not comparable to other leagues around the world. But, like I said earlier about the Kings front office staff having their own plan and their own vision, you see something like this, where they invested in Ice Baron, AEG did, the parent company of the Kings. I don't remember how many years ago, but it's got to be going on at least 5 or 6, if not more. Their executives have been over to, LA, you bump into them in the halls of the office from time to time. A couple players from Ice Baron always get invited to training camp, and development camp. I know that executives for the Kings serve on the board for Ice Baron. There's been, a ton of business side communication over the years, whether it was coordinating social media or business strategies, etc. You had players coming over, being invited here and there. And now you see, right, the Kings send 5 prospects over to Berlin, and Alex Turcotte has the assist on the game-winning goal in a preseason game for them. It's great. And it just shows flexibility and creativity are incredibly important. And the more that the league grows, and the more that things like the salary cap are going to restrict team's ability to take advantage of, Toronto can't just buy a Stanley Cup team. you're going to see creative teams take advantage of, whether it's an analytics department, a scouting department, looking for players in markets that weren't traditionally, known as strong hockey markets, right? Taking Anže Kopitar from Slovenia, signing college free agents, signing on undrafted guys, sending prospects to Germany, that sort of thing. Those are going to be the little inches that make up the difference when every other team is spending to the cap, and that's it.
Especially in the next couple of years where it's flat cap.
Yeah.
And you're going to have to get creative to make all this stuff work. Just going past a half an hour here, Jesse, I don't want to keep you too much longer, but I want to ask you about bubble hockey. As a hockey fan,
yeah,
we saw the playoffs. It was a success by all accounts for the NHL to do it. The only thing, the note that I had was they should have piped in some booing for Gary Bettman, but I think he has fun with it now. But it really seemed to work out well. There's some whispers that there could be some sort of bubble to start the next season. What were your impressions of bubble hockey, and anything that you may have heard that you can sort of drop some knowledge on us with in terms of bubble hockey?
So I'll take it from a fan perspective first, because I frequently repeat on my podcast or on the intermission reports I do for Fox Sports West. Ultimately, I'm just a fan, right? I've been a fan of the LA Kings since the mid 80s. I don't remember the year that I went to my first game, but it was before Wayne Gretzky got here. So, I mean, I am a fan who got incredibly lucky to have the career that I have.
And for people who don't remember, that's pre-1988.
That's right. Yeah. I think my first game was probably like 86 or 85. Anyway, the bubble to me was great. I thought it was fantastic. Given unbelievably difficult circumstances, I watched, I don't know how many of the games, but a lot of them. Yeah. And I never once felt, maybe like the first game, maybe. But after you just sort of adjusted to the fact that the screens were there and the tarps were covering the seats, I thought it was fine. I think I wish they had left out the fake crowd noise, and just played the players. I understand why they couldn't, but the one thing that I couldn't stop noticing was, because they had the distortion on the ice level audio so that you didn't catch any profanity, when the scrums were happening and you could hear the players sort of barking at each other, the distortion would make it sound, maybe it was this, would clip out audio, pieces of audio, and it sounded like they were talking backwards at times. Yeah. And when the ref would approach the penalty box to call a penalty, right, when his mic was hot, but he wasn't actually, using his mic PA voice, you'd get a little bit of that distortion. So that was a little bit distracting. But if that's the worst thing I can say about the entire experience, it's a pretty minor complaint. And that is really just a tick I have about noticing stupid things like that. I agree with you. I think booing Gary Bettman is honest. And I believe... this is going to sound absurd, but I sincerely believe this with all of my heart. I think after the handshake lines and all of the rituals and traditions around, handing the cup out to the teams, and the trophies and everything, I think booing Gary Bettman is my favorite tradition in the NHL. And I particularly love it because, from my perspective anyway, as a guy with silver in his beard, my perspective, well, let me ask you this. Sorry, I'm going to ask you a question on your show. If you had to explain to somebody who had never seen a hockey game, didn't care about hockey, didn't follow the NHL, why the fans booed the commissioner, what would your answer be?
I think it started off as people thought he was an outsider coming into a closed circle in hockey. And as time has gone along, and as some of the ideas that he has have worked, I think it's actually become a bit of an endearing thing that people now do it. And he smiles when they do it now. I think at first he didn't like it either, but now it's become such a thing that it's kind of endearing between the fans and the commissioner, that there's this kind of thing that we didn't like you, but now we kind of begrudgingly like you. And as time's gone along, he's been proven right more often than not. And I think that's what it is.
I think that's the perfect answer. And I don't think I could have said it any more succinctly. I guess I was 15 when he became commissioner. And even though I was out in LA and in Southern California, we didn't get a bunch of hockey. No one was giving hot takes on the sports radio. Jim Rome didn't have a lot of callers calling about hockey or the Kings. But even I knew in my late teens and early 20s that Gary Bettman, he's a basketball guy. He doesn't like hockey. He doesn't care about hockey. He wants to get rid of fighting. There's a team in Anaheim and it's named after a Disney movie. you're ruining the sport, Bettman. What are you doing? And then you had a couple labor disputes. And yeah, it was boo this guy, boo this, movement to ruin the league. But you're right. Over the last 27 years, gosh, it's been a while. The game has grown in ways that I never thought I wanted it to grow. He hired whoever, blanking on the gentleman's name, I apologize, but whoever he hired away, or the league hired away from the NFL, the guy that came up with the idea for the Winter Classic and handled all of their events early in the 2000s, like, that's a brilliant move. Expanding into markets like Nashville, Minnesota, Atlanta, and Columbus. Obviously it didn't work out in Atlanta, and I don't have any particular love for the way the Minnesota Wild play the game of hockey, but Nashville and Columbus are great, right? Nashville is a completely unique experience in the NHL. I've been to a game down there. The arena is great. The fans are great. We saw it on their run a few years ago to the Cup final. They have just an incredible fan base, and you see the overall revenue of the league explode up to $5 billion a year or whatever it is. Obviously the pandemic will knock that down a peg, and now all of a sudden you have this world where I can get on Twitter and talk to you, right? Yeah. Right? Like, you and I are having this conversation. You're in Hamilton, I'm in Los Angeles, and it's fantastic. And I think you're 100% right. I think booing Gary is at this point a sign of affection. And I think he gets it. And like I said, I just think it's a lovely sort of subversive tradition that I'm really fond of. To answer the second part of your question an hour later,
I love having you on.
About what I can tell you about, what the next season's going to look like. I can't tell you anything.
Yeah.
I think Bill Foley sort of said the quiet part out loud.
Yeah, he did.
When he said, Vancouver will play in the Canadian bubble. So, I mean, I don't know if it's going to be 4 different pods or bubbles. I don't know if it's going to be like the Major League Baseball did it, right, where teams travel, but they only travel within a certain geographical region. I don't know if they're going to do it like the NFL, where they just cross their fingers and go, all right, good luck, everybody.
That one doesn't feel likely.
No, it doesn't. Well, especially with 7 teams playing in Canada. But I mean, like I said, I think Bill Foley tipped everybody's hand. And so now that conversation can be had. And you go like, yeah, those 7 teams are probably going to play at least the first half of the season against each other, if for no other reason than just quarantining logistics.
Yeah.
And, look, in LA, we've got San Jose is in, a 45-minute flight north of us. It's a 45-minute drive to Anaheim, traffic permitting. It's a 4 or 5 hour drive to Vegas. It's an 8 or 9 hour drive to Phoenix. I'm not worried about the NHL. I am worried about the AHL and the ECHL. And what their seasons are going to look like. That's my real concern.
We're going through the same thing up here, and we're just keeping the fingers crossed and hoping. The target date has been December 1st. We're all hoping that we can get it going at that point and have everybody back on the ice for us up here. It's been too long since we've had a game. But Jesse, in wrapping this up, I just want to give you an opportunity. Fans here in Hamilton, I know they've started to catch on with the Kings, especially with Arthur Calif and Matt Luff being there. But please let everybody know where they can find you, the podcast, anything you want to plug here, please go ahead.
Thanks. So the podcast is All the Kingsmen, but we also have a podcast devoted to our AHL affiliate, the Ontario Reign, called the Rainy Day Podcast. Cameron Close is the play-by-play announcer, and Zach Dooley is the sort of beat reporter for the team. They host it. They do an incredible job. They interview players, 1 player per game, or per episode, I should say. If it's not a current player, then it's a former player, whether it's Peter Budaj or, former players that have played for Ontario back when it was part of the ECHL. They get into it, right? Stories about minor leagues, college hockey, etc. All the Kingsmen is sort of more of an overview of the Kings franchise. I like to get into long, sort of crazy questions. But because we have this extended off season, I have been talking to a lot of people that have a day-to-day experience watching these players. So, for example, we've already spoken to Corey Stillman, had a chance to talk to Andreas Lilia, who's the assistant coach of the Malmo Redhawks, where Helge Grans plays. Those episodes haven't gone up yet, but lots of interviews, lots of insight. We do All the Kingsmen live every week, every Thursday at noon, which you can find on the Kings Twitter, Twitch, YouTube, and Facebook channels. And you can go and stream or subscribe any of our podcasts at lakings.com/podcast. because we also have a third podcast called Fox and Faust, featuring Jim Fox and Alex Faust. Alex Faust, obviously our play-by-play guy. Jim Fox, our color commentator and former right-winger for the organization. They're in hiatus right now because they get to go and have a vacation. The rest of us have to try and find a way to fill airtime for almost a calendar year. But anyway, all of those can be found at lakings.com/podcast. I think that's it. Yeah, that's it.
Awesome. I am a dedicated listener to all three, and I am very much looking forward to that one with Andreas Lilia because Helge Grans is in Malmo. The Bruins have a couple of prospects over in Sweden. I've been watching a ton of SHL to open up the year. But, Jesse, I really appreciate your time, all your insight on the LA Kings and what's going to happen with some of our Hamilton Bulldogs moving forward. Now, I want to make this announcement while you're on, because as you talk about players that have been with the Kings that you've been able to talk to, coming up next Thursday, we actually have 2020 NHL Stanley Cup finalist and Western Conference champion, as well as former Bulldog 2018 Memorial Cup champion Nick Camano is going to be our special guest next Thursday. That one will come your way at 5 p.m. right here on Bulldogs Live. So we're trying to catch up to what you guys have going on down there in LA, Jesse.
Awesome. And Reed, we'd love to have you on all the Kingsmen Live sometime soon.
Oh, anytime you let me know, I'd be more than happy to come on. Thank you so much for your time here today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And we'll see you next Thursday, 5 p.m. Bulldogs Live, catching up with Nick Camano.